At 9:47 p.m. on June 27, 1942, FBI Special Agent Frank Johnson watched through binoculars as a trusted American citizen named Herbert Haupt entered a Chicago restaurant to meet with a man carrying German invasion plans. Haupt wasn't supposed to be in America. According to military intelligence, he'd drowned off the Florida coast 2 weeks earlier. But here he stood, alive, smiling, ordering coffee while discussing sabotage targets that could kill thousands. In the next 8 weeks, Haupt's betrayal would expose the most ambitious enemy sabotage operation ever attempted on American soil, led to the largest espionage trial in U.S. history, and end with 6 men dying in the electric chair. The trusted insider wasn't who anyone thought he was. Herbert Hans Haupt seemed like the perfect American success story. Born in Stettin, Germany, in 1919, his family immigrated to Chicago when he was 5 years old. They settled in a working-class neighborhood on the north side, where his father opened a small optical shop on Lincoln Avenue. Young Herbert grew up speaking English without an accent, playing baseball in vacant lots, attending Lane Technical High School. He worked as an apprentice optician in his father's shop, dated local girls, talked about the Cubs. Neighbors knew him as Herb or Herbie, just another American kid trying to make something of himself during the Depression. By 1941, Haupt had established himself as a skilled machinist and optical technician. He worked at Simpson Optical Company, handling precision instruments and gaining expertise in lens grinding and mechanical engineering. His supervisor called him one of the most talented young machinists I'd ever seen. Haupt joined the YMCA, played in a bowling league, attended occasional Lutheran church services with his parents. To everyone who knew him, Herbert Haupt represented the American dream, an immigrant who'd fully embraced his adopted country. His friends trusted him completely. His employers valued his technical skills. Even FBI background checks conducted during routine industrial security screenings found nothing suspicious. But Haupt had a secret that predated Pearl Harbor. In 1941, he'd traveled to Mexico with a friend, ostensibly for vacation. From Mexico City, he'd boarded a Japanese ship to occupied Japan, then traveled through Siberia to Nazi Germany. His stated reason was visiting his grandmother and exploring his heritage. The real reason was darker. Once in Germany, Haupt had contacted the Abwehr, German military intelligence, and volunteered his services. The Abwehr evaluated his American background, his technical skills, his knowledge of Chicago's industrial infrastructure. They saw potential. Herbert Haupt, the all-American machinist, became Agent 17B in Operation Pastorius, Germany's plan to sabotage American war production through trained sleeper agents. The Abwehr trained Haupt at their sabotage school near Berlin. For 3 months, he learned to build time-delay incendiary devices, construct explosive charges from common materials, identify vulnerable industrial targets. Instructors taught him secret writing techniques, using invisible ink, dead drop protocols for receiving instructions, cover stories for explaining his return to America. Haupt studied the aluminum plants in East St. Louis, the hydroelectric facilities at Niagara Falls, the railroad bridges crossing the Ohio River. He memorized emergency contact procedures and recognition phrases. The weather is clearing meant abort. My uncle is sick meant surveillance detected. The Abwehr equipped him with $4,000 in American currency, forged selective service papers showing he'd registered for the draft, and a cover story about returning from Mexico. On June 13, 1942, Haupt arrived on a Long Island beach aboard German submarine U-202. He came ashore at 12:20 a.m. with 3 other saboteurs, carrying explosives buried in waterproof containers. The plan called for them to disperse to different cities, establish normal civilian lives, then begin systematic sabotage of war production facilities. Haupt's specific assignment targeted Chicago's rail yards and aluminum processing plants. Within 6 months, Operation Pastorius was supposed to cripple American industrial output through coordinated bombings that would appear accidental. The Abwehr estimated the operation could delay Allied war production by 8 to 12 months, potentially changing the outcome of the European war. Haupt immediately returned to Chicago and resumed his old life. He moved back in with his parents, contacted his former girlfriend Gerda Stuckman, and looked for machinist work. To neighbors, his return seemed normal. A young man who'd been traveling had come home. He explained his absence with vague stories about job hunting in Mexico and visiting relatives in Germany before the war made travel impossible. Most people accepted this without question. His girlfriend was thrilled to see him. His parents welcomed their son home. Even the FBI agents who'd noted his travel to Germany in 1941 saw nothing immediately suspicious about his return. But small inconsistencies began appearing almost immediately. Wolfgang Vergen, a family friend who worked at a defense plant, noticed Haupt asking unusually specific questions about production schedules and security procedures. He wanted to know which shifts had the fewest guards, which buildings held the most flammable materials, Vergen later testified. I thought he was just curious about factory work. Haupt also spent money freely, buying his girlfriend expensive gifts, purchasing a new car, taking his parents to fancy restaurants, despite claiming to be unemployed and job hunting. His father Hans noticed this discrepancy. I asked him where the money came from, the elder Haupt recalled. He said he'd saved it in Mexico, but the amounts didn't make sense for someone who'd been traveling. The second incident was harder to dismiss. On June 22, 1942, Haupt purchased a large quantity of aluminum powder and sulfuric acid from a Chicago chemical supply company. The clerk who sold it to him, Michael Trainer, found the purchase unusual enough to mention it to his brother-in-law, a police officer. Most people buying those materials together are either chemistry students or working in industrial labs, Trainer explained. Haupt had no employer, no school affiliation. When I asked what he needed it for, he got nervous and said, experiments. Then he paid cash and left quickly. Trainer's brother-in-law filed a routine report. In normal times, it might have gone nowhere. But these weren't normal times. FBI Special Agent Frank Johnson had been monitoring reports of suspicious chemical purchases since January 1942. The Bureau was hyper-vigilant about potential sabotage. Japanese internment had begun. German-American Bund activities were under surveillance. And intelligence suggested Abwehr operations in the Americas. When Trainer's report crossed Johnson's desk, mentioning a young German-American buying sabotage materials, it triggered a connection. Cross-referencing the name Herbert Haupt with immigration and travel records revealed his 1941 trip to Germany. That detail alone warranted investigation. Johnson decided to watch Haupt without revealing suspicion. The surveillance began on June 23, 1942. Johnson followed standard counterintelligence protocol. He assigned a 4-man rotating surveillance team to track Haupt's movements, photographing everyone he met, noting every location he visited. The Bureau tapped his parents' phone line. Agents rented an apartment across the street to monitor comings and goings. Johnson personally reviewed all evidence daily, searching for patterns. For 3 days, Haupt's behavior seemed innocuous. He visited his girlfriend. He ate dinner with his parents. He walked around the neighborhood. But on June 26th, the pattern broke. At 2:15 a.m., Haupt left his parents' house through the back door. He walked 6 blocks south, checking over his shoulder repeatedly. The surveillance team followed from a distance, using vehicles positioned along likely routes. Haupt entered an all-night drugstore, made a phone call from the public booth, then exited and took a circuitous route through alleys. The behavior indicated counter-surveillance awareness, someone checking for tails. At 3:40 a.m., Haupt reached the lakefront near Montrose Beach. He sat on a bench for 20 minutes. Then a second man approached. They sat together for 7 minutes. No money changed hands, but Haupt passed the man a folded paper. The contact stood, walked north, disappeared into pre-dawn darkness. Johnson's team photographed the exchange from 150 feet away. The image quality was poor, shadowy figures on a bench, but the dead drop protocol was unmistakable. Haupt had just made contact with someone using classic espionage tradecraft. Johnson now faced a terrible decision. He could arrest Haupt immediately on suspicion of espionage, but without knowing who the contact was or what network existed, they might miss the larger operation. Or he could continue surveillance, hoping to identify more conspirators, but risk Haupt successfully executing sabotage that could kill workers at defense plants. The conservative estimate held that a successful bombing at the aluminum plant in East St. Louis could kill 40 to 60 workers and set back production by 3 months. Johnson chose to wait and watch, but he escalated immediately. He contacted FBI headquarters in Washington, requesting authorization for intensive surveillance and priority analysis of Haupt's activities. Director J. Edgar Hoover personally approved the operation, designating it top priority, national security. The Bureau assigned additional agents, installed more sophisticated phone monitoring equipment, and began 24-hour surveillance. They photographed everyone Haupt contacted. They opened his mail. They bribed his landlord to search his room. And on June 27th, their patience produced results. At 9:47 p.m., Haupt entered Bernie's restaurant on Clark Street. The establishment was known for its German-American clientele, a logical meeting place that provided cover as ethnic socializing. Haupt sat in a corner booth. At 10:03 p.m., a man in his mid-30s entered, scanned the room, then joined Haupt's table. FBI agent Thomas Donegan, positioned at the counter drinking coffee, watched them through a mirror positioned above the cash register. The stranger pulled papers from his jacket, technical drawings of some kind. Haupt leaned forward, studying them intently. They spoke in low voices for 17 minutes. Donegan couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see Haupt's reactions, nodding, pointing at specific details on the drawings, taking notes on a napkin. The meeting ended at 10:20 p.m. The stranger left first, walking north on Clark Street. Haupt remained seated for 5 minutes, studying his napkin notes, then tucked the napkin in his pocket and paid his check. FBI agents followed both men. The stranger led them to a boarding house in Rogers Park, a neighborhood with many German immigrants. Cross-referencing the address, revealed the residence of Otto Vergen, a machinist at the Dodge Chicago plant, which manufactured aircraft engine components. Vergen had access to complete facility blueprints, production schedules, and security protocols. He also had a cousin in the Abwehr. Haupt returned to his parents' house. At 11:35 p.m., agents watched him retrieve something from beneath the back porch, a package wrapped in oilcloth. He brought it to his room. The next morning, while Haupt was out, FBI agents entered the house with his parents' permission. His father, increasingly suspicious of his son's activities, cooperated fully. In Herbert's room, hidden in a hollowed-out book, agents found $3,570 in cash, a list of industrial targets in Chicago written in German, technical specifications for time delay incendiary devices, and a one-time pad cipher for encoding messages. The evidence was irrefutable. Herbert Haupt was an active enemy agent preparing sabotage operations on American soil. But Johnson still didn't arrest him. The Bureau wanted the entire network. On June 28th, agents set a trap. They drafted a false intelligence report claiming that security at the Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit had been relaxed due to labor shortages, with only skeleton crews on night shifts. They planted this report in a file cabinet at Otto Vergen's workplace, knowing Vergen had occasional access to administrative offices. Then they waited. If Haupt was running a sabotage network, he'd pass this valuable intelligence to his handlers. If he planned imminent attacks, he'd redirect resources toward this tempting target. On July 1st, Haupt met Otto Vergen again, this time at Humboldt Park. FBI agents positioned themselves on park benches, pretending to read newspapers while directional microphones captured the conversation. Vergen mentioned the Detroit information. Haupt's reaction was immediate and revealing. "When can we move on it?" he asked. 2 weeks, Vergen replied. "I need time to acquire materials without raising suspicion." They discussed logistics, how to transport explosives to Detroit, which entry points offered least security, optimal placement of devices to maximize damage while maintaining appearance of accidental fire. The surveillance team recorded everything. They photographed Vergen passing Haupt additional documents, security schedules, guard rotation patterns, emergency response protocols. The meeting lasted 43 minutes. When it ended, Haupt walked directly to Union Station and purchased a train ticket to New York, departing July 4th. The ticket purchase triggered immediate concern. Why New York? Did Haupt have contacts there? Was he planning to flee the country? Or was New York another sabotage target? Johnson contacted the FBI's New York field office, requesting surveillance coordination. But events were already accelerating beyond anyone's control. On June 27th, the same night, Haupt met Vergen at Bernie's restaurant. Another saboteur from Operation Pastorius, George Dash, had walked into FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and surrendered. Dash, consumed by guilt and fear, confessed the entire operation. He revealed that 8 saboteurs had landed, 4 on Long Island, 4 in Florida. He provided names, target lists, training details, recognition codes. Within hours, FBI agents began arresting the other conspirators. By June 30th, 7 of the 8 saboteurs were in custody. Only Herbert Haupt remained free, unaware that his Confederates had been captured. Johnson received orders on July 2nd, arrest Haupt immediately. The Bureau didn't want to risk him learning about the other arrests and fleeing or accelerating his sabotage timeline. At 6:15 a.m. on July 3rd, 1942, 12 FBI agents surrounded the Haupt family residence. Johnson knocked on the door. Herbert's father answered. "We're here for your son," Johnson said quietly. "I know," Hans Haupt replied, tears in his eyes. "I suspected for weeks." Herbert Haupt was arrested in his bedroom, still sleeping. Agents found him with a packed suitcase containing civilian clothes, over $200 in cash, and 2 timing pencils for delayed detonation devices hidden in fountain pens. The interrogation began immediately. Haupt was transported to the FBI's Chicago field office and placed in an interrogation room with no windows, a single desk, 2 chairs, and fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly. For the first 6 hours, Haupt said nothing beyond confirming his name. Johnson and other agents presented evidence. Photographs of him receiving documents from Vergen, recordings of their conversations discussing sabotage, the materials found in his room, financial records showing unexplained wealth. Haupt stared at the table, silent. At 2:30 p.m., Johnson changed tactics. He didn't threaten, he didn't cajole. He simply stated facts. George Dash confessed everything. Edward Curling is in custody. Richard Quirin is in custody. The entire operation is finished. You're the last one free, and now you're not free. Your parents will be questioned as accomplices. Your girlfriend will be investigated. Everyone you've contacted in the last month will face scrutiny. The only question remaining is whether you cooperate now or watch everyone you care about suffer because you stayed silent. Haupt broke at 4:17 p.m. His first words were, "How many do you have?" When Johnson confirmed all 8 saboteurs were captured, Haupt's shoulders slumped. "Then it doesn't matter anymore," he said. What followed was a comprehensive confession, spanning 14 hours across 2 days. Haupt detailed his recruitment by the Abwehr, his training in Germany, his infiltration back into America. He described the sabotage targets: the Hell Gate Bridge in New York, the hydroelectric plants at Niagara Falls, the aluminum factories in Tennessee and Illinois, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. He explained the plan's timeline: 6 months of preparation, then coordinated attacks designed to appear accidental, creating maximum disruption without revealing organized enemy action. Haupt revealed his specific role: Chicago Coordinator. He was supposed to recruit additional American accomplices, disgruntled workers at defense plants, German sympathizers, opportunists, motivated by money. Otto Vergen was his first successful recruitment. Haupt had approached him carefully, testing his loyalty through increasingly provocative conversations about the war, gauging his receptiveness to helping the old country. Vergen had agreed for ideological reasons. He believed Germany was fighting against communism and that America was on the wrong side. The two had been planning their first sabotage attempt for mid-July. An incendiary attack on the Plower Dodge Chicago plant timed to ignite during night shift when fewest workers were present, but maximum equipment would be destroyed. The damage assessment revealed the operation's staggering scope. The 8 saboteurs had been equipped with $175,200 in American currency for bribing accomplices and funding operations. They carried enough explosives to destroy 6 major facilities. Their target list included bridges that carried 30% of East Coast rail traffic, factories producing 40% of American aluminum output, and hydroelectric plants powering defense industries across the Northeast. If fully successful, Operation Pastorius could have set back American war production by 8 to 12 months, exactly as the Abwehr had calculated. The TNT blocks found buried on Long Island could have destroyed the Hell Gate Bridge, severing the rail connection between New England and the rest of the country. Backtracking through Haupt's activities revealed additional disturbing details. The chemical supplies he'd purchased were sufficient to create 16-time delay incendiary devices. He'd already conducted reconnaissance at 3 Chicago-area defense plants: the Dodge factory, the Stuart Warner plant producing aircraft instruments, and the Pullman Standard facility manufacturing tank components. Haupt had detailed notes on guard patterns, shift changes, locations of flammable materials, optimal placement points for maximum destruction. Investigators cross-referenced these notes with Wergen's access and realized the two had been planning simultaneous attacks on all 3 facilities for the week of July 19, 1942. Had they succeeded, conservative estimates suggested 80 to 120 workers could have died, with production delays exceeding 5 months. Enemy confirmation came from multiple sources. After the war, captured Abwehr documents revealed Operation Pastorius had been personally approved by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, chief of German military intelligence. The operation represented Germany's most sophisticated attempt to wage sabotage warfare on American territory. Intercepted German communications from July 1942 showed confusion and dismay when the saboteurs failed to make scheduled radio contact. One message, decoded through the MAGIC program, stated, "Operation 17, Pastorius code name, appears compromised. All agents silent. Assume capture. Catastrophic loss of capability." The Abwehr had invested 8 months planning the operation, training the agents, and infiltrating them into America. Its complete failure within 3 weeks represented a devastating intelligence defeat. Post-war interviews with Walter Kappa, the Abwehr officer who recruited and trained the saboteurs, revealed the operation's strategic importance. "We believed 8 determined men with proper training could accomplish what 1,000 bombs could not," Kappa explained during Allied interrogation in 1946. Sabotage creates fear, suspicion, disruption beyond the immediate damage. Workers wonder if their co-workers are enemy agents. Security tightens, slowing production. Trust evaporates. That was the real goal, making Americans fear the enemy among them. Haupt's betrayal of his adopted country was meant to trigger precisely this paranoia. The psychological impact on those who'd known Haupt was profound and lasting. His girlfriend Gerda Stuckmann testified at trial that she'd suspected nothing. "He was the same Herbie I'd known before he left," she said through tears. "Kind, funny, talking about our future together. I never imagined he was planning to kill Americans." She'd introduced Haupt to friends who worked at defense plants, unknowingly providing him with additional reconnaissance contacts. The guilt consumed her. Wolfgang Wergen, the family friend who'd first noticed Haupt's suspicious questions, blamed himself for not reporting his concerns immediately. "I thought I was being paranoid," Wergen said. "I dismissed what my instincts were telling me. If I'd acted sooner, maybe Otto wouldn't have been recruited." Hans and Erna Haupt, Herbert's parents, faced immediate arrest as potential accomplices. FBI agents interrogated them for 3 days, searching for evidence they'd knowingly aided their son's espionage. The investigation cleared them of deliberate involvement, but Hans Haupt admitted he'd suspected his son was involved in something illegal. "I knew the money didn't make sense. I knew his stories had contradictions. But he was my son. I wanted to believe him," the elder Haupt testified. "I chose family loyalty over civic duty. That choice haunts me. Both parents were released but faced social ostracism. Neighbors stopped speaking to them. Hans's optical shop lost customers. They lived the rest of their lives under suspicion. The trial began on July 8, 1942, just 5 days after Haupt's arrest. President Franklin D. Roosevelt convened a secret military commission rather than civilian court, citing the laws of war and the necessity of swift justice. The trial was held in the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C., with all 8 saboteurs tried simultaneously. Security was extraordinary. Armed guards at every entrance, no press allowed, proceedings classified top secret. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the saboteurs' confessions, the buried explosives, the target lists, testimony from FBI agents who'd conducted surveillance. Haupt was charged with conspiracy to commit sabotage, espionage against the United States, and violation of the laws of war by entering the country as an unlawful combatant. His court-appointed defense attorney, Colonel Carl Ristine, argued that Haupt had never actually committed sabotage, only planned it, and therefore deserved leniency. The argument failed completely. The military commission ruled that conspiracy to commit sabotage during wartime, combined with the act of infiltrating American territory as an enemy agent, constituted sufficient grounds for the death penalty under established military law. The motivation emerged clearly during trial testimony. Haupt had acted from a combination of ideology and identity confusion. Raised in America, but born in Germany, he'd never fully resolved his dual heritage. His 1941 trip to Germany had awakened romanticized notions of the fatherland: clean cities, discipline, purpose, belonging. The Abwehr had exploited this identity crisis brilliantly, telling Haupt he could serve his true homeland while appearing to be American. Money played a secondary role. The $4,000 stipend was substantial but not extraordinary. What motivated Haupt was the belief that he was serving a greater cause, that Germany represented civilization against communism and chaos. His confession included a chilling statement: "I thought I was being patriotic, just to a different country than the one I lived in." The verdict was delivered on August 3, 1942. All 8 saboteurs were found guilty. 6 were sentenced to death by electrocution. 2, George Dash, who'd surrendered voluntarily, and Ernest Berger, who'd cooperated extensively, received prison sentences. Herbert Haupt was among those condemned to die. He was 23 years old. The sentence specified execution at the District of Columbia Jail, using the electric chair, within 7 days. President Roosevelt personally reviewed and approved the sentences on August the 7th. There would be no appeals, no clemency, no delays. On August 8, 1942, at 12:02 p.m., Herbert Hans Haupt was led into the execution chamber. He wore prison-issued gray trousers and a white shirt. His head had been shaved where the electrode would make contact. 8 witnesses were present: military officers, Justice Department officials, the prison warden. Haupt was strapped into the oak electric chair, metal restraints securing his wrists, ankles, and chest. The leather hood was placed over his head. When asked for final words, Haupt said, "I made a mistake. I'm sorry." 3 syllables, then silence. Niada. 12:04 p.m., 2,000 volts surged through Haupt's body. His muscles convulsed violently against the restraints. The first jolt lasted 30 seconds. Doctors checked for heartbeat. Finding faint signs of life, a second jolt was administered, 2,400 volts for 15 seconds. At 12:06 p.m., Herbert Haupt was pronounced dead. His body was removed, placed in a plain pine coffin, and buried in an unmarked grave at Blue Plains Potter's Field in Anacostia. The location was kept secret to prevent any grave from becoming a shrine for Nazi sympathizers. His parents were notified by telegram. They were not allowed to claim the body. 5 other saboteurs died the same way that day, executed in pairs at 20-minute intervals. Edward Curling died at 12:26 p.m. Richard Quirin at 12:46 p.m. Heinrich Heinck at 1:06 p.m. Werner Thiel at 1:26 p.m. Hermann Neubauer at 1:46 p.m. The executions were documented with clinical precision, but never photographed. The only public announcement came on August 8th in a brief War Department press release. 6 enemy agents found guilty of espionage and sabotage were executed today at the District of Columbia Jail. 2 others received prison sentences. The statement included no names, no details, no elaboration. Operation Pastorius's complete failure triggered massive security overhauls across American defense industries. The War Department implemented new protocols requiring multiple background checks for anyone with access to sensitive facilities. Single-person knowledge of complete security systems was eliminated. Compartmentalization became standard procedure. No individual worker could know entire facility layouts, shift patterns, and security protocols simultaneously. The FBI expanded counterintelligence operations, creating dedicated teams to monitor defense plant workers with foreign-born backgrounds. Voluntary loyalty review boards were established at major factories, where co-workers could confidentially report suspicious behavior. These changes created operational costs. Production slowed by 7 to 12% in the months following Pastorius as new security procedures were implemented. Worker morale suffered as German-American and Italian-American employees faced increased scrutiny and subtle discrimination. Trust, which had lubricated the informal networks that made factories efficient, was replaced by verification systems that introduced bureaucratic friction. But sabotage attempts dropped to near zero. In the 45 months between Haupt's execution and VE Day, not a single confirmed enemy sabotage operation succeeded on American soil. The security changes, purchased with efficiency losses, worked. The families of potential victims never learned how close they'd come to tragedy. Workers at the Dodge Chicago plant, the Hell Gate Bridge crew, the hydroelectric plant operators in Niagara Falls. None were told that enemy agents had planned their deaths. Official policy held that revealing the full scope of Operation Pastorius might create panic or alert the Abwehr to investigative methods. So the averted disasters remained classified. Men and women went to work at targeted facilities, unaware that FBI surveillance had saved their lives. The complete story didn't emerge until 1945, after Germany's surrender, when partial details were finally declassified. Those who investigated Haupt carried permanent scars. Frank Johnson, the FBI agent who'd led the surveillance, later described the psychological burden. I watched him for 9 days knowing he was planning to kill Americans but not knowing when or where. Every night I went home wondering if he'd succeeded while I slept. Every morning I expected to hear about a factory fire, an explosion, dozens dead. The weight of that responsibility never leaves you. Johnson requested transfer from counterintelligence work in 1943, citing stress-related health issues. He spent the remainder of his FBI career in administrative roles, never conducting field surveillance again. The broader message transcended one young man's betrayal. Operation Pastorius demonstrated that treachery in modern warfare doesn't arrive through obvious enemies in uniform. It comes through trusted friends, acculturated neighbors, people who speak without accents and know the words to American songs. Herbert Haupt attended the same high schools as the young men he planned to kill. He dated American girls, bowled in American leagues, worked in American factories. His betrayal succeeded as long as it did precisely because he seemed completely American. The danger wasn't the foreign other. It was the insider who'd turned enemy while maintaining every appearance of loyalty. That's how betrayal actually works in war. Not through melodramatic villains with obvious evil intentions. Through ordinary people navigating complex loyalties, persuaded by ideology, or money, or confused identity, that they're serving a higher purpose. Herbert Haupt believed he was being patriotic, just to the wrong country. That conviction allowed him to plan murders without seeing himself as a murderer, to betray his neighbors while thinking he remained honorable. The human capacity for rationalization, for transforming treachery into virtue through mental gymnastics, made him far more dangerous than any amount of explosives. The final image from Operation Pastorius isn't the electric chair or the unmarked grave. It's Herbert Haupt's personnel file, stamped traitor, in red ink across his photograph, stored in FBI archives where it remains today. A young face, earnest expression, looking every bit like the loyal American he pretended to be. The file is occasionally retrieved when intelligence analysts study insider threats, teaching new generations of investigators that trust, once exploited, becomes the deadliest weapon. The question it poses remains unanswerable. How many others were never caught? How many betrayals succeeded because no one suspected in time? Those questions haunt counterintelligence professionals still. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.